Welcome to the Network for Financial Crime Prevention podcast. And today's episode, Building Bridges in Financial Crime Inside the World of Compliance Conferences, where we explore the evolving landscape of compliance, risk management, and the fight against financial crime. As you probably well aware, my name is Louis Vargas, and I'm the founder of NFCP. And I'm thrilled today to have Vincent Beard, the director of Antitrust, Secondaries, and Financial Crime at Informa Connect. The Informa is a global business informational service group connecting specialized markets through events, digital communities, and research, while Informa Connect is a key division focusing on content-led live digital events, training, and platforms for sectors like finance, life sciences, and pop culture, providing knowledge and networking for professionals to gain a commercial edge. Before we start this conversation with Vincent, just a bit of quick housekeeping. If you're not a member of NFCP, you can sign up via our website, which is nfcp.info. You could also follow us on LinkedIn and also subscribe to our podcast via Apple, Spotify, and YouTube channels. Our community exists for you, for those that work in the risk compliance and fin crime areas in any industry. Keep in mind, we are only sharing our personal thoughts, and in no way what we say today should be taken as legal advice. It's a bit of a different conversation today, but I always like to throw that caveat in there. And in today's conversation, we'll dive into the challenges of event management and how to remain relevant in the focus area. Whether you're a compliance professional, a fintech innovator, or simply curious, this episode offers invaluable insights. So, Vincent, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on, Louis.
Yeah, so before we get into the questions, Vincent and I were lucky enough to meet a year or so ago. I've been working with Informa Connect for a few years now on different events, both here in the Nordics and in London. And when Vincent took over, we were introduced by the previous person in charge for those events. And I was very happy to continue the relationship with Informa and now form a relationship with you. And the work you guys do is great, putting these events together for the community at large, and especially free for those within the industry, which I think is super rare when you look at some of the other players in the game who sometimes charge exorbitant amounts just to get a seat at the table. I'm happy to now put you in front of the camera with this conversation than your usual position behind the scenes with the events.
Amazing. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I know, previously that you'd worked with my colleague David, and what we always do is when someone leaves and we try to hand over, one of the kind of key questions is, who are the people that are really kind of friendly to the group? So we'll be befriending, and your name was right at the top of the list. And can say that everything that David said about you was true. And really appreciate all your help over the last year or so, and looking forward to continuing that relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the kind words. And in no way was that, part of this arrangement. So just in case whoever's listening. So Vincent, let's get to you, man. So, you've carved out a unique niche as a conference director, focusing on antitrust, secondaries, and financial crime at Informa Connect. Can you walk us through your journey into event management and what drew you to this field initially? And how did you discover your passion for organizing events, specifically now, in our community's focus point, which is risk and compliance and anti-financial crime?
Yeah, totally. No, I remember going to university and studying English, and at school, the joke was always, oh, if you study English, then you're going to be an English teacher. And it was something that was not of interest to me, but I was kind of really stuck at the time of what do I want to kind of do with my career. And then I remember in my final year, I was living with a friend who was organizing music events. So completely unrelated field. Obviously, that was B2C as opposed to B2B, but it was just really kind of great watching him and planning the outreach, the communication, getting the lineup of speakers, at that point, musicians, and
Right.
just watching the kind of way that it unfolded. And then even just to the day, going to the event, having a great time, and just kind of knowing he was a little bit of that success. So I think that's probably the first moment that drew me to the idea of working in events. But even then, I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do. And I also know, as I was younger, I considered, journalism. I do feel like there is some overlaps between journalism and kind of conference production and content with the story you create and the content that you put out for others. I think those are the kind of two things that ended up starting my path towards this. And then in terms of this area specifically, I remember writing a piece on the financial crash in 2008 for my school newspaper, and until that moment, I don't even know why I chose that, to be honest, because I had no experience within finance at any point before then. But after that moment, that was just something that was very, very interesting to me. And I've worked across many different divisions at my time as a commerce producer. I've done cybersecurity, I've done finance, consumer, but I've always been drawn to the kind of financial space, especially because I think it's so practical, and obviously what's happening in the world is massively affecting all of us. It felt like it was an area that I should probably learn more about, and as a result, I think it's always drawn me in.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And what really stood out to me is that you kind of fell into this by accident, like a lot of us did. Kind of, we start different careers or go to university studying something else, and just an opportunity pops up in this area, and we're like, okay, we'll give it a try. And we're like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. So it kind of seemed like you were on a similar path where, you had a friend in an event planning space, and he was like, okay, this seems cool, and you kind of then veered into our world, an accident. Now
No,
we got you.
And I was always so jealous actually of the people that I went to uni with that were studying engineering or law, and I was like, you guys clearly know exactly what you're going to be doing for the next 40 years, and I had no clue, but I'm definitely grateful, and it ended up all right.
Yeah, and we're definitely happy to have you in this space. Like I said, you're a friend to the room and to the community. And I mean, I agree with you 100%. The people I knew who went to uni who had a clear vision of what they wanted to do, like my wife, she always knew she wanted to be an educator, and that's her trajectory was that the whole time. Me, I was just, I don't know, I'll try this, I try a little of that, and I just at the end had to end up studying history because that's what I was passionate about outside of school. So I was like, that's the only way I'm going to graduate, is that I got to just focus on this little thing, which I probably can't get a career out of because I'm not going to stay to my doctorate. And yeah, that's the only way I could graduate. But looking at it in hindsight, it definitely gave me the skills I needed for being in this field now, being analytical and being able to do research. So things happen for a reason, right? It's not always a linear path.
Exactly. And I think just because you don't know doesn't mean you're not going to figure it out along the way. So as you say, everyone has a very, very different path, and it's just a case of finding out what's best for you. I could have easily done something similar to my friends, and I probably would have had a terrible time and probably wouldn't have ended up here. So yeah, we all go on the right path eventually.
So building upon how you got into this field, I'm just curious now how, based on how, financial crime and antitrust and compliance and the other areas you've worked on are incredibly complex and also rapidly changing fields. How do you, stay current with the developments in these areas to ensure that your conferences remain relevant and valuable to practitioners?
Yeah, I remember when one of my first jobs I ever started, and one of the kind of first pieces of advice I ever got in this industry was that people who attend this conference are tending to kind of learn to network. So if it's information they can just Google it online, then they're probably not going to find your conference valuable because you're just copying and pasting what people can already find out about. And probably in the age of AI as well, I think that's probably even more relevant. So my kind of first thing is always to be as close to the industry as possible. I'm by no means a financial crime expert, but just surrounding myself with people like yourself who are is kind of been my number one go-to, and making sure that there's always going to be kind of key developments and finding out as quickly as you can what those are and how we can make them as an interesting topic. So I think that's been my main approach. And then when we have research calls, so I try and speak to the industry throughout the year. Just because I've got an event in September probably means I'll start working on it, as you know, in January, and also having to be flexible as well, right? Because between now and September, there's going to be a lot of things that have changed. Some things that are relevant now won't be relevant then. Some things that we aren't isn't even on our mind right now is going to be the biggest topic in the world in September. So just trying to kind of keep that flexibility too I think has always been important.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to bring up, and I'm glad you raised it, is that, how dynamic our world is today, and with especially geopolitically, you start rightfully so, start planning far out in advance, but by the time you get closer to the date, things could be drastically different. And you mentioned you try to be as flexible as possible, but I guess can you give a bit more insight on how you practically do that? I mean, to me, it seems pretty challenging, putting a whole event together and then trying to be malleable to the times. But how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was actually some live examples recently, but what I will do, for example, is to kick off when I write the agenda, because I'm writing the agenda with no one speaker in mind. So I try maybe start a little bit more on a high level, and then I always say to people when I'm inviting them to speak, I'd never like, sometimes they'll ask me, oh, what panel do you want me to speak on? And I always say, you're the expert, not me. So I'd much rather you tell me where you best fit, as opposed to me trying to do it the other way around. So once we have the panelists for a particular session, we can then kind of hone in exactly what are the kind of key bullet points here. So they might be bullet points that will be more relevant for people that are more sentence focused as opposed to people that are more think kind focused. So then we can kind of change them and make sure that we're really using the skill and the expertise that's kind of on the panel, and from there finding out what people are up to, what's keeping them awake at night, what's making their lives harder, easier, and trying to focus on those bits as opposed to the other bits that I wrote 6, 7 months ago that might not be as relevant, or even they might be relevant, but they might not be fitting for the current panel. So there's a conference I'm doing on antitrust that's focused on one of the HSR rules, which is a form that companies have to fill in before they go through a merger. And there was an announcement a few weeks ago that might be ending, and I've got a panel on that in May. So we're speaking with the panelists between now and kind of deciding, is this still going to be relevant in May? So do we be changing it slightly, keeping it the same? Yeah, just again going back to my first point as well about just talking with people constantly and making sure that we're doing the right thing.
Communication is key. That's the main idea I hear from that. So thank you very much for sharing. And dovetails nicely into my next question is, you know, what makes a truly impactful anti-financial crime and compliance conference, and how do you balance the need for technical depth and accessibility for your attendees that could be at different experience levels?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think especially with the Nordic conference that we work together on is especially key because it's an event that's been growing a lot lately, and what that means is that we're getting some really great speakers, some really senior speakers, but we're also getting kind of people in attendance that are maybe slightly earlier off in their careers. So just trying to make it as relevant. You don't want to go too high level, and you don't want to go too into the weeds either. When I first started working on conferences, the first training conferences I ever did was first conference I did was training events. So what that meant was that it usually used to be 1 or 2 days, and it used to only be about 3 or 4 talks a day, and it would be 90 minutes in length. We were very demanding of our speakers back then, and the idea was to just kind of really go into the weeds. And I think there is a lot to be said about that for the conference because, again, you're there to kind of learn, to find out what others are seeing, what the others are up to. So I do like to kind of balance the agenda with kind of in-depth topics. But maybe what I will also do is start at the beginning of the conference, maybe with some higher level topics, just to kind of set the scene. And then as we get later in the day, we can kind of really hone in because you end up seeing similar themes throughout the day. So if we can start at a slightly higher level, we can then maybe go into it in a little bit more depth. So I think that's one side of things. And then probably the other side is just purely getting the best speakers. For example, this year's goal for me is to try and get more regulators to the conference because I know everyone wants to kind of hear from them, especially with some new pending regulations. But just kind of listening to what people want and what will be valuable. Whenever I'm on a research call with someone, I always try and make sure I'm asking who are the people you want to hear from, who are the people that maybe haven't attended before that you think should be attending, who have attended in the past, who are great, and just trying to get any kind of nugget of information from people in terms of how to make the event even better.
Thank you. And the regulator part, I think, is super key, especially here in the Nordics, as we discussed. And I'm sure you know this, but what I've noticed that works well when you have regulators in the room is everybody wants to hear what they have to say, even though generally they're very guarded in what they say. I know Pekka, who represents Finland, gets a bit more in depth when you save them for the toward the end of the conference is good because it keeps people more engaged because like, okay, I want to hear what they have to say. Then if you put them in the beginning, because then people just want to come to see them, and then they're okay, I'm done. So yeah, when you save them for the middle end, it's good because then the crowd stays, I feel, more engaged, and they want to actually stay for the whole event. Because as you know, after lunch sometimes there's a drop off of attention. But when the regulator's there, I feel like everybody stands at attention a bit longer.
No, absolutely. And I think especially with the new regulations coming up, I think there's going to be a lot more need to kind of hear from their perspectives as well for this year. So hopefully I can find some new speakers and get them in the room.
Definitely fingers crossed on that one. Um, over the years of organizing these specialized conferences, what shifts have you observed in the priorities and challenges facing compliance and fin crime professionals?
Yeah, no, I think that's another really good question, and I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the industry because I'm not a financial crime expert. But I know when I first started doing the training courses that I mentioned, a lot of them were very much kind of regulation focused. Obviously, we're still coming out of the financial crash, and I remember doing events on Basel III, FRTB, liquidity. My observation are whether it's right or wrong, but I do feel like since then the industry has evolved and we're spending now kind of more time on being kind of proactive steps on implementing real change and making sure that we're doing right by our customers, by the shareholders, by the people that we work with as well. So I know when we're doing the regulation stuff, there was a lot of kind of trying to implement things as effectively and as efficiently as possible, whilst now I think we are even more focused on not just in regulation, but actually what does the regulation mean and how can we make sure that we are staying ahead of the criminals and others that are making our lives hard.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people that I know who attend events or participate in events, are starting to feel like, well, people are a bit guarded on what they say. Maybe they, are a bit too high level or kind of regurgitate stuff that's already out there. They're not really sharing new stuff, but they really enjoy the networking part because that's where you could be, up close and honest with people and have those conversations. But I could see how it's a delicate balance for you as an event organizer, right? Because like you said, you're trying to meet people where they are, right? Whether they're early in their career or later in their career. But, you can't change people's comfortability of how they speak and what they share. So yeah, I guess it's not so much a question, but more of like a hope that, when people are approached by you and other event organizers, it's like, think about who's in the audience and when let's say now they're being asked, but they were once an attendee, how to make it engaging, how to, of course, not share, information you're not supposed to, but share information so that you're really teaching others and not just being super scared of giving your opinion. And I have to say, you're very good at kind of providing that space for us. But I just hope that others really embrace it to really, not be so scared or so guarded to make a mistake because it's all of our opinions, right? So we should be comfortable in our skin sharing how we feel about certain things or how we're approaching things. But yeah, I mean, I guess, with your experience, how have you balanced that kind of where, you want people engaged in the content, and not just attending for the free food and free drinks? How do you balance that?
No, it is. It can sometimes be hard because at the end of the day, we need to make people feel comfortable, and the only way for them to kind of speak as freely as they can is if they feel comfortable. So we'll try and implement certain things like Chatham House rules at some of our events too. But I do appreciate that there's not always there's some things that people just can't say or don't feel comfortable in saying. And at the same time as well, what we'll do is look at the landscape. So when I'm speaking with people for my research course, I always ask questions in kind of two different ways. I always ask, first of all, what are the kind of topics that you would like to speak on? But then I also like to ask questions like, what would you like to hear about that you might not be comfortable speaking on yourself? Because sometimes you get two very, very different answers, and the topics you're comfortable on or to speak on, you might not be comfortable to speak on in the sense that you are kind of too close to the scenario. So finding people that are able to fit into one or two boxes, and then finding the speakers based on those responses sometimes is another thing that I try. But yeah, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes.
And, I'm just curious now, trying to focus on, I guess partially what I asked before about more the human element, right? So, beyond the logistics and content creation, what aspects of bringing together this community are you most passionate about? And part two of that question is, have you had any moments or feedback from attendees that been most meaningful for you or to you?
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to sound too kind of cheesy, but like you guys are genuinely great to work with. There's a reason that I've been doing this for kind of 10 plus years, and most of my career has been spent within the financial industry. It's just because it's been a pleasure to work with people such as yourself, and just working with people that are passionate about a subject and kind of really care about making a positive change. So at the end of the day, I feel like I'm playing a small bit in kind of helping us protect consumers and protect, doing financial crime events to kind of help protect consumers and protect people. So that's just great. And in terms of feedback from attendees, yeah, it's always really nice when I'm at a registration desk, so it's the first day of a conference, and you start seeing people that have maybe not seen each other since the conference last year, or maybe have not seen each other for a while. So it's really just nice kind of seeing those hugs or kind of smiles on people's faces when they see someone that they're familiar with. So that's one aspect. Another one, especially for this conference last year, I think we had a few speakers that had never spoken before, so they were very, very kind in their words pre and post conference, especially just about the ability to be able to kind of get up on stage and thanking me for being able to contribute. And yeah, it's really nice to kind of start people on their conference journey and being in their room. So there's so much good things about this industry, and I think people are in it for the right reasons as well. So it just makes my life a lot nicer.
Again, we didn't pay for these comments, anybody listening. So, last question before you're off the hot seat. Looking ahead, how do you see the conference and professional development landscape evolving for this space, especially with emerging technologies and changing regulatory environments?
Yeah, no, I mean, I make this joke sometimes to people where you can have a conference on whatever you want these days, but you have a panel on AI. It can be a farming conference, it can be a financial crime conference. You can have a panel on AI. So I think AI will fundamentally change a lot of things, but I would like to think that in short to medium term anyway, there's not going to impact what those kind of water cooler moments are. A little bit to what you were talking about earlier about people attending these conferences for the networking side of things. So I know that people really get a lot of value from hearing what their peers are doing and just kind of comparing notes, having a chat at these conferences. So that's one thing that probably hopefully won't be effective and will still be important for people to attend in person. But that's also not me trying to sound naive. And I think AI will have a big impact on the way that we put out the conferences and what people want to kind of talk about, creating new topics around regulations. So yeah, I think my part is just to make sure that I'm putting content out that's relevant for people, and whether that changes depending on regulation, whether that changes depending on technology, it's just up to kind of everyone else to decide and me to just play a role in laying it out.
And especially how technology is evolving and how our world has shifted to a virtual environment, especially after COVID. I feel like, a lot of conferences have gone the hybrid route or sometimes have gone strictly virtual. But I'm glad that you've kind of stuck with the I guess, old school approach of keeping it in person because yeah, I feel like you just learn more when you're there in person. And like you said, people get to see each other that they may haven't seen for in a couple of years or whatever, and they get to, re-engage. And that's something that you just can't do appropriately virtually. It's hopefully something we continue to see with conferences, that we bring people together.
No, absolutely. And going back to your earlier point about it's like certain moments. I remember a few years ago, I had a conference where we had a academic speaker, and then that speaker, we had two other speakers at the same conference, and they used to be his PhD students that ended up then going to his seminars, going into the industry, and then going into, well, going up the ladder and speaking at the conference. So that was amazing to feel. And there was a great photo on LinkedIn afterwards. But I certainly don't miss virtual events, but funnily enough, I think the Nordics event that I've spoken a bit about today was actually launched as a virtual event because it was launched in 2020, which was a fantastic time to launch an international conference. But it did mean that it was good that we were able to kind of get a footprint, and it kind of has helped us launch the event and continue to grow it every year. So there was some good things that came out of COVID and virtual events, but I certainly don't miss them. And yeah, I would always choose to do a fully physical event as opposed to a hybrid or virtual one if I can.
Awesome. So with that said, I want to thank you again so much, Vincent, for sharing your insights and the work that you do and your team does at Informa Connect, and what you're doing to continue to upskill and bring risk and compliance and anti-financial crime professionals together. For our listeners who want to learn more about Informa Connect, you can visit their website, informaconnect.com, and you could reach out to Vincent directly via LinkedIn. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Network for Financial Crime Prevention podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. You could also visit us again at nfcp.info to learn more about our network, become a member, see the resources we have, upcoming events, all that good stuff. We're building a community dedicated to collaboration, innovation, and knowledge sharing in the fight against financial crime, and no matter what industry you are. So I know we say financial crime a lot, but we really want to bring the community together, especially since with today's geopolitical issues, a lot of things are merging together. So until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, be brave, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in compliance and financial crime prevention. This has been the Network for Financial Crime Prevention podcast. Thanks again, Vincent.
Thanks, Steve.